The town of Islip has a rich history of unique tales that have crafted its 335 years as a township. In this series, we will dive into the history of Islip and the many intriguing people and tales that created the Islip we know today. Welcome to Islip History. Hi, this is Islip Town Supervisor Angie Carpenter. In this episode, we will uncover the spooky side of Islip's history, from a witch trial in the town's early days to the spiritual presence at one of the town's most historic buildings. We are going to learn about Islip's haunted history. After Salem's infamous witch trials ended, the practice continued elsewhere, even here in Islip. But was early Islip actually home to a witch, or was this just an exercise in 1700s rumor spreading?
This is the original town minutes starting in 1720 when the first meeting occurred. In the back is an extremely interesting entry. It's an entry of a scandalous report. It's August the 2nd in 1737, and it states, whereas a scandalous report raised by Clement Morris, Jr. against Mary Newton, daughter of John Newton, and to end all controversy, said Mary Newton has been searched by Elizabeth Phillips, and she has declared before us that the said Mary Newton is in her proper shape and nothing different from other women upon any account, but what is usual, and said Clement Morris has acknowledged that he raised a false report against her, said Mary Newton, and is very sorry for it. Witnessed by us, George Phillips, William Green, Elizabeth Phillips. And it's interesting that the entry was done in August the 2nd, but as you can see, it wasn't entered till September the 24th. But what this looks like is an accusation of possible witchcraft. Well, as far as we can tell, he made some sort of accusation, and the law changed in 1735 to say that if you claimed you were a witch, if you claimed that you could contact spirits, then it was subject to trial and you could be imprisoned or fined. It was no longer a capital offense. It was basically you were a public annoyance. The important part that I think that this has something to do with an accusation under the new law of purporting to be a witch is that she is in her proper shape and nothing deterrent from other women on any account. The old witchcraft thing, they used to look for certain indications that perhaps the witch had some additional body markings that might indicate. So it's a good chance that this was an accusation, but it was interesting the way it was handled. In Islip, they formed a committee. The committee decided that there was nothing to this and basically got the person who had made the charge to admit that it was false. It also, the dates, that's something that would be interesting to everybody because this was conducted on the 2nd of August but not entered to the 24th of September. This town was very much under the control of the Nickel family. At that time, the William Nickel of that time did not live all the time in Islip. He actually lived in his wife's home up in Smithtown or Huntington, and it probably was sent up to him. They would send it up to him, and he basically agreed with them. There was nothing going on here, and take care of it. The taking care of it may have been simply throwing Mr. Morris out of town. We have heard from the Newton family that they knew about this incident. We do know that the Newton family did live in Oakdale, or what is now today Oakdale, and they were the founders of today's Sayville United Methodist Church. Back then, it was the First Methodist Episcopal Church of Sayville. So we know the family was here. We can put some of the facts together. The rest, you think it's a witch? You will never know. We weren't there. But it's an interesting story.
Oakwood Cemetery is home to many of the town's historic figures' remains. Some of these individuals met premature deaths and were murdered. Here, a ghostly figure will tell us their stories.
This is the gravesite of Cynthia Clark Hawkins. She was married to Captain Frank Hawkins, who was a successful sea captain and businessman with his brothers in the local lumber company on Main Street. The Clarks and Hawkins were among the prominent families in Islip. The untimely death of her husband at the age of 44 in 1879 placed a burden on her raising her children. Asbury, her oldest, was a brash young man who began to use his idle time carousing and drinking with young men and servant girls in the surrounding village. She strongly disapproved of his lifestyle and his friends and let him know his feelings at every opportunity. At one time, Asbury arose, he set a date to marry Haiti Schecht, a German servant girl. She was furious and inconsolable. Asbury was offended. However, she never imagined what her son would do to her. On the night of October 1st, 1888, Asbury, under the ruse of visiting her sick sister, rented a carriage and escorted her to see her. On a trip up Brentwood Road, she vehemently objected to his planned marriage. In a rage, Asbury pulled out a gun and shot her, beat her in the head, and shot her again. He left her by the side of the road. Initially, it was thought to be a robbery, but the family suspected Asbury was the culprit. After a quick trial, Asbury was sentenced to hang at the Riverhead Jail on December 11, 1888. He was the last person hung in Suffolk County for a capital crime.
Islip has always been known for its place in the heart of the Great South Bay, and with it, its rich history of fishermen and seafarers. But did that attract a predator in the form of a pirate? Let us hear from a victim's account from beyond the grave, a victim of New York's last pirate.
My name is Captain George Hanford Burr. I'm Islip born and raised, and resided here with my wife and 5 children. I was a successful coastal captain operating the oyster sloop E.A. Johnson, which I co-owned with Sailor Howell, also of Islip. In mid-March 1860, I docked at Spring Street in Lower Manhattan before setting off to secure oysters from Chesapeake Bay for the Great South Bay. Oysters were a lucrative product, and our bay was a major supplier on the East Coast. I carried more than $500 in gold coins on this trip. In the city, I sought an additional crewman to augment my crew of Islip brothers, Oliver and Smith Watts, and that's where my demise began. His name was Albert Hicksy Hicks, who would later say he was drugged and then dumped on my vessel. He claimed that he awoke from a drug-induced stupor as we sailed out of New York Harbor. Myself and one of the watch boys were asleep below deck on the evening of March 20th. Hicks stated in his June 1860 trial that while steering the sloop, suddenly the devil took possession of me. He then assaulted the crewman on watch, hitting him with a capstar bar, crushing his head. Hearing the commotion, the other brother rushed from below, and then was assaulted with an axe. Hicks then entered the cabin and attacked me with an axe. I tried to fight him off, but was overcome. He threw us all overboard. Later, Hicks was captured by New York City detectives in Rhode Island and sent to Tombs Prison, where he was sentenced to death. He was visited there by many people, including P.T. Barnum, who paid for his death mask for his museum. On July 13, 1860, Hicks was transported from the prison by ferry to Bedloe Island, now Liberty Island, where he was hung. Over 10,000 people viewed the hanging from the island and charter boats. He was the last person to be hung for piracy in New York State. Before he died, Hicks admitted to killing nearly 97 people in the California gold fields. You realize that mine is a watery grave. This marker was placed by my family to commemorate my life. The Watch Boys have no such grave.
When the town of Islip took over the grounds of Brookwood Hall to create a home for the Islip Arts Council and the Islip Art Museum, they may have also inherited the former residents of the estate with it.
We're here at Brookwood Hall, which, as one of Town of Islip's offices, actually is also home to some of Town of Islip's spirits, or at least we think so.
In 1903, this building was built for the Knapp family. The senior Knapp wanted to give it to his son, And in 1929, his son said, yeah, no, I really don't want to manage that building. And they sold the building to the Thorne family. Thorne family is well known in this environment.
Well, the family that lived here and were here during World War II, when the Germans dropped off saboteurs both in Florida and in Montauk area, the mother panicked and decided that they would move to a much safer place. They had properties all over, and she sold it literally with everything in it. And at the same time, the orphanage in Brooklyn was looking for a new place because their building was being taken over by the Navy as they expanded the Navy Yard for World War II. So it wound up being a very happy coincidence.
So in my 12 years here, I have heard many stories. Some things happened to me firsthand. We've had paranormal studies, and we've had a lot of interesting things.
We think that somehow the spirits of some of the children that lived here, when this was not only a very happy mansion, but also a very happy orphanage. The children here were well taken care of, and all of them loved this place. So at night, we have all sorts of stories of laughter after hours when things are closed up, doors opening and closing.
Often, doors would bang open. I've been here on a rainy afternoon, a dark rainy afternoon, all by myself in my office, which was the visiting room for the orphans when the orphans lived here. I was sitting at my desk, and it wasn't a particularly windy day, although it was raining out, and the lights had gone on and off, and all of a sudden, the door opened. I'm like, what's happening? What's happening? Another time, I came in after 24 hours being out of the office, came in, the door was wide open. This door is never opened. I never opened this door. I have come in at times, and this door somehow is wide open. And the reason I know that it's been tampered with is because this painting always stays up here, and the painting is on its side or it's upside down. We have now put this printer here because we don't want this happening anymore. It's really quite spooky. I hear singing, I hear laughing, I hear jumping, and I walked out in the hall, went across the hall to the other office, which was the music room, by the way, originally when it was the orphanage. And there was no music on in there, and certainly no children were in there, no voices, but I heard the children. I walked into the hallway, everything stopped. It still does, give me the chills.
I've heard the laughter, and I'm not exactly an overly big believer in ghosts, but I've heard the laughter, heard the doors opening and closing, gone upstairs to see who was running around inside, and there was nobody there, and no doors were open.
A town employee had left for the day, locked up the building, and left out of the front door, and somehow came around and saw that this door was open. But on that day, the alarm was on. So how does this open? How does it not set off the alarm? How does somebody then walk through that door, go up 3 flights of stairs, and go out an exit door from the fire escape? All these things happen in this place that you really don't know about. The breakfast room is the room where we have the historical exhibitions now, and that room has a very strange way to close the door. You really can't lock the door. Close the door every night as I'm leaving, or my employees close the door every night. Like, we don't have a key for it. It was locked 2 mornings in a row. How does it get locked? You know, crazy things. It's an old building, but we love it.
Again, this was a really happy place. All the children, when it snowed, had sleighs. They ice skated on the pond. They all had skates. They went to schools in the local schools, went to church in the local churches. And the interesting irony of it is many of the orphans wound up settling in East Islip and Islip because they loved this area so much and this place was so dear to them. They must be happy because you hear them laughing. So it's a happy place.
The child spirits of Brookwood Hall have only been identified as friendly and happy, which is fitting for the idyllic site of their childhood. One recurring sighting for years now has been that of a young boy sitting at the mouth of the lake. Numerous people have reported seeing this happy young boy sitting at the edge of the water, staring out at sunset, only for him to disappear right after. Maybe even in the afterlife, a resident appreciates a peaceful view only possible in the town of Islip.